War. Since the early days of mankind, war has ravaged across the globe. In the name of good or evil, to attack or defend, war has created empires and destroyed nations. Since the time of Alexander the Great, results on the battlefield had much to do with the great generals who led their armies to victory or followed them into exile. A great military mind was able to see an opportunity where others saw only a lost cause. A great general was able to develop a plan of attack that could outwit an opponent or respond to an offensive action with speed and agility. In the 20th century came the greatest war the world had ever known. A war between many nations that pitted modern armor, aircraft, and weaponry on a scale unimaginable by the armies of old. World War II. In this war, many were called to greatness. Leaders emerged from small country towns and large urban areas. No nation was more blessed with military leaders than the United States of America. Generals who rose from the ranks to lead their troops to battle. Men who were born to greatness, and men who had greatness thrust upon them. This is their story. The famous generals of World War II. They were legends in their own time and remain so today. Their lives were an inspiration, and their deeds the stuff of history. Here now is the story of General Omar Bradley. To military historians, General Bradley's name is synonymous with the forces of liberation that brought to an end the tyrannical era of Nazi Germany in World War II. But Omar Bradley also was instrumental in the post-war world. Paris, spring of 1953, almost 10 years after liberation. Flags of many nations stand in harmony. A general, chairman of the American Joint Chiefs of Staff, arrives to take part with other world leaders in a program of peace based on a union of Western strength, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization known as NATO. Soft-spoken, honest in his opinion, to his intimates he was known simply as Brad. To everyone, he was Bradley the soldier, the soldier's general, the personification of a great army, a great nation. Unlike General George S. Patton, this man had no sense of destiny in his makeup. He never had it, even when he moved along the broken paths of mankind's greatest war. He moved as a soldier, with a soldier's determination. Bradley was perhaps the greatest strategist in modern warfare. He was a man of quiet dignity who was not afraid to speak his mind, but felt no need to grandstand or make great speeches. In battle, he smashed ahead against a formidable enemy with a force of almost 1.25 million men. No American general ever had exercised direct field command over so many combat troops. The end of the Nazi rule. Here he is shown at Berchtesgaden, the mountain retreat of Hitler, who had felt destiny had chosen him to rule the world. With a soldier's determination, Omar Nelson Bradley had won a brilliant campaign. He had come a long way, this general, geographically and otherwise, from the heart of America, from a state that had known many famous Americans, Mark Twain, General Blackjack Pershing, President Truman. He was to serve as general under not one president, but three. In addition to Harry S. Truman, seen here at Potsdam, Germany, there was Dwight D. Eisenhower, his former wartime chief. And wartime President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. 50 miles from the Missouri River, on the birthday of Abraham Lincoln, Omar Bradley was born into the home of a poorly paid country school teacher. The year was 1893. He was the only child. He learned to fish, to hunt quail, and became an expert marksman. The name Omar came from a family friend, not the Persian poet. Bradley idolized his father, acquiring from him a way of life. To patch up the family budget, the elder Bradley did some farming. From such roots, the boy learned the meaning of patience, the patience that comes with fishing. Bradley was only 14 when his father died. After high school, he sold newspapers and worked at the Wabash Railroad shops at 17 cents an hour. But a Sunday school teacher suggested West Point. And West Point it became, the United States Military Academy. Here, he studied Lee, Grant, Pershing. The class of 1915, Brad's class, was to furnish 56 generals. They said of Bradley, as quiet as the Hudson, a trait duly noted by his class biographer. True merit is like a river. The deeper it is, the less noise it makes. This was Bradley. And they wrote further of his determination to get there. There was much in this remark. In World War I, he commanded an infantry company at the Butte, Montana copper mines. He felt as if his career was ruined because he was left out of the fight in Europe. In 1920, he was ordered to West Point as an instructor in mathematics. From 1924 to 1939, Army schools, routine duty periods with troops in the United States and Hawaii. Then, on to General Staff in Washington. Finally, in the early part of 1941, Commandant of the Infantry School at Fort Benning, Georgia. He acquired an impeccable reputation as a fine infantry officer. There wasn't a thing that these men did that Bradley couldn't or wouldn't do, for he had great physical endurance. He was a true leader of men. February 1943. Bradley was in Florida training a division for duty overseas. World War II was in its second year for the United States, and Bradley was to be included in the fight. Word finally came to report to French North Africa. For the first time in 32 years as a soldier, Bradley was off to war, selected by Chief of Staff General George C. Marshall, who had been watching this great infantryman for years. Now, as deputy commander and commander of the U.S. Second Corps, he helped push the Tunisian campaign to victory. British commander Sir Alexander congratulated him on a job well done. As they said out in Bradley's part of the country, he fought to beat the band. After Africa, the invasion of Sicily. Bradley took Second Corps into Sicily under General George S. Patton's command. Plans for the Channel assault on France were well underway when General Marshall sent word to Eisenhower, "My choice has been Bradley." He meant for Bradley to lead the American forces for the great Normandy invasion, Operation Overlord. As commanding general of the First Army, Bradley was ashore less than 24 hours after the first Allied units hit the Normandy beaches. The Battle of Europe was to be an infantryman's battle, and leading these hard-fisted men was a man who, in the words of General Marshall, was fit for any command in the Army. A week after D-Day, and we had linked the Allied forces together in a beachhead 42 miles wide. A prime objective, the port of Cherbourg. As Bradley's First Army pushed ahead, happy Frenchmen began to breathe the first fresh air of liberation and rushed to make the Allies feel at home. The Nazis had been fighting a two-front war for years. They were determined not to give in. At all costs, they meant to keep us from getting a harbor, a suitable port for our supplies. But the German commanders were soon to feel the power of Bradley's punch. For once Bradley made up his mind, he moved swiftly, relentlessly. Following the Battle of Saint-Lô, he headed the 12th Army Group. As American forces plowed ahead, they moved out of the peninsula, then toward and beyond Paris. 43 divisions were to be deployed under Bradley's command. The 12th Army Group included General Courtney H. Hodges' First Army, General George S. Patton, Jr.'s Third Army, General William H. Simpson's Ninth Army, and General Leonard T. Giroux' 15th Army. No sit-back-at-the-headquarters type of general, Bradley inspected a battle in person, traveling in an ordinary jeep. There wasn't a bit of glamour or fanfare in his whole tall, lanky frame. He got the most out of his men by patient goodwill. He knew every division commander by his first name. When an officer performed as he expected him to, he gave him a free hand. If he hesitated, he tried to help him. And if he failed, Bradley relieved him. He won the respect of everyone, even the boisterous Patton, who was Bradley's commander in French North Africa and Sicily. In fact, George S. Patton became one of Bradley's closest friends. Many battles justified faith in Bradley, but one especially was the big breakout, the battle for Saint-Lô and the breakout from the peninsula, one of the most decisive battles of Bradley's military career. Two major impediments faced Bradley, the terrain and the Germans. The terrain the troops would have to fight through was marshy and enclosed into thousands of separate little fields by hedgerows. And behind many, the Germans were well entrenched. The Germans who faced the Allies in the soggy fields of Normandy may have been disheartened by the success of the Allied landings. And the German people may have been exhausted after 5 years of war on 5 fronts. But the troops themselves were far from beaten. They were skillful, tough troops, seasoned by experience. Their discipline was sharp. Their morale was high. The Germans also had a new weapon, the deadly V-1, the small, pilotless jet aircraft, which had begun to fall on England in the middle of June. A supersonic V-2, even more devastating than the V-1, was almost ready for operational use. These weapons gave the Germans hope of reversing their discouraging situation. Adolf Hitler was directing the war himself. Believing that eventually the Germans would be able to launch a large-scale offensive which would drive the Allies from the continent, he planned in the meantime to pin them down in Normandy and prevent them from using their mobile powers. Although some of his commanders now recommended limited withdrawals to make their defensive position stronger, Hitler refused. To withdraw for any reason at this time seemed to him to admit defeat. So, as American forces prepared to strike across the hedge-rowed lowland where the Germans had erected strong defenses, Hitler announced that those defenses were to be held. The American attack began in the dawn hours of July 3rd, and it lasted for 17 rain-soaked, agonizing days. The soggy, hedge-rowed terrain immobilized the mechanized power of the Allied ground forces. The slow, painful advance was measured in yards, a hedgerow at a time. Like the steady rain which fell over the entire operation, a sense of despair and frustration touched all those who participated. But the Allies were not ready to give up. The last action in this offensive was the battle for Saint-Lô. The Allies wanted Saint-Lô for a number of reasons. Its prestige value, the effect its capture would have on the Germans, and as an access to roads leading south. After a week of bitter fighting, they got it. The cost was high, as was true in all the hedgerow fighting. But the town was secured, and in the process, a memorial was created. An infantry battalion commander, killed before the gates of the city, was carried into Saint-Lô with the liberators. His body was placed on a pile of rubble, an impromptu shrine to the qualities of courage and sacrifice that made the drive to Saint-Lô possible. General Bradley had been forming the second part of his breakout plan for some time. Bradley's plan, which was codenamed Cobra, was to gather together an overwhelming concentration of ground troops, twice as great a force as would normally be used on such a narrow front, and combine it with a massive assault from the air by the Army Air Corps. Between the end of the earlier July offensive and the launching of Cobra, there was a lull for about 1 week. For the weary American troops, it was a welcome respite, a time to relax. On July 20th, a dramatic event electrified the world and revealed that there was no relaxation inside the enemy camp. Hitler himself announced that a cabal of high-ranking German officers had tried to assassinate him with a bomb in order to seize political power. The abortive coup had little effect on the military situation. It revealed no widespread discontent with Nazi rule among the armed forces. The combat soldier was too busy simply trying to remain alive, and the information about the German situation, which the Allies wanted as Cobra neared its jump-off date, was of a considerably more immediate nature. Did the enemy have enough reserves available to counter the attack? Was the Luftwaffe capable of intervening? And finally, would the Germans employ the V-1 or V-2 or some other secret weapon? These were the questions that haunted the Allied camp as it waited to unleash Cobra. July 24th was the day scheduled for the attack. Because the day was heavily overcast, however, with inadequate visibility for an air attack, the operation was postponed. Unfortunately, the postponement order reached the English air bases too late to hold back all the planes scheduled for the attack. Bombardment from the planes which did not receive the postponement order was not great enough to damage German positions seriously, but it was sufficient to alert them to the threat of a ground attack. And German artillery gave American forward units a hard time for the rest of that day. For General Bradley, an immediate and urgent decision had to be made. The prospects were improving for good weather for the next day. Should Cobra be launched, even in the face of the possibility that Americans had now lost the important element of tactical surprise? Or should it be postponed, at least for several days, which might then give the Germans a chance to prepare even stronger defenses? Bradley's decision? Cobra would strike again at 11 a.m. the next day. Again on the morning of July 25th, the planes came. One observer called the seemingly endless waves of planes the most imposing aerial parade I've seen since the beginning of this long war. In all, they dropped more than 4,000 tons of destruction. But the tactical effect was not immediately clear. Did the bomber attack destroy the efficiency of the German troops? No one could tell. General J. Lawton Collins, 7th Corps commander, who was to spearhead the attack, had little time to ponder the question. For better or for worse, Cobra was launched. troops moved out at once. Their immediate objectives were the towns of Marigny and Saint-Gilles. Capture of those towns by the infantry would give the Americans control of the roads leading south, and Collins would then be able to catapult his mobile armored forces forward. It seemed reasonable to assume that if the air bombardment had destroyed the German defenses, the infantry troops would be able to reach and secure their objectives without great difficulty. To their surprise, they met strong resistance. The Germans were not willing to give up without a fierce fight. At the end of the first day of the attack, Marigny and Saint-Gilles were still in enemy hands. Because the entire success of Cobra depended on a 7th Corps breakthrough, Collins decided to gamble. It would prove to be one of the fateful decisions of the campaign. He pondered the possibilities and the risks and decided to put his armor into action. The gamble paid off. In mid-afternoon of the 26th, one armored column, having cracked the enemy's defenses around the town, drove through Saint-Gilles. There was no longer any doubt. The German line definitely had been penetrated. The 7th Corps had achieved its breakthrough. But the drama of the breakthrough did not end there. The drama lay in the development of the breakthrough into a breakout of major proportions. The decision to accomplish this was General Bradley's. He had achieved the limited victory he had sought. Cobra had been a success. He could stop now. But he sensed from their disorganized reaction that a deep wound had been inflicted on the Germans. The Americans pressed their attack through rapidly crumbling German defenses. By the end of the month, United States forces stood at the base of the peninsula, at the gates of the province of Brittany. And the nightmarish phase of the battle, the war of stalemate, was over. The breakthrough cracked the back of the Nazi Wehrmacht. Bradley had created it, planned it, down to the last detail. The way was open, the way to Paris. The enemy west of Paris was destroyed. As it fell, the liberation of France fell only days away. That the Bradley breakthrough worked was due to a soldier's determination. Hopes now ran high for a quick end to the war in Europe. Paris, liberated. Bradley could have gone into Paris himself, but the quiet man from Missouri was not built like that. He had waited for his chief. A liberated nation honored him. Bradley was to receive many decorations, as well as honorary degrees from universities. Someone has said of Bradley that he always behaved as though he were a civilian in uniform. Even as Paris celebrated, something was happening. After the fastest blitz of modern war, the Allies had to apply the brakes. Logistics, that age-old problem of supplying a mighty fighting force on the offensive, had run into difficulties. Bradley had lost momentum. The deep stalemate of winter set in. Then, quite suddenly, counterattack. The Battle of the Bulge, the greatest crisis in Bradley's military career. Dark moments, unpredictable moments. It was the enemy's dying thrust. The Allies were thrown back. Even when the enemy was a few miles from his headquarters, Bradley refused to move back. He reasoned such a move could destroy confidence. From generals on down, solid proof was needed during those trying days that you were not a Nazi disguised as an American. The Battle of the Bulge over, the Rhine soon came into view. There wasn't much more to it after this. Operation Overlord, which had swept a relatively unknown general into prominence, had blasted asunder the myth of Nazi invulnerability. From the Omaha beachhead to Berlin, a stunned enemy wondered how it could have happened. From an all-American farm boy to four-star general. True to American tradition, the job helped make the man, and the man made history. And he never once lost his humility. In post-war America, Bradley was to play a large role in world affairs, affairs as they pertained to America's survival as a nation facing the global threat of the Soviet Empire. Prior to becoming the Army's Chief of Staff in 1948, he had spent 2 years as Veterans Administrator. With him are Air Chief Hoyt Vandenberg and Navy Chief Louis E. Denfeld. In Bradley's characteristic way, he considered his job another opportunity to serve his country, and America needed him. For a new type of terror had set in, the Cold War. One of his first tests was the great Berlin airlift of 1948 and 1949. Starve the people of West Berlin, came the orders from Moscow. So the Soviet Army imposed a blockade on all overland transport between Berlin and the West. All trade stopped. Industrial paralysis threatened West Berlin, but not for long. The air was still free, and from the free nations poured supplies for the people of West Berlin. The airlift broke the blockade, our first victory in the Cold War. This type of war called for a reassessment of our military objectives. And that's where Bradley fit into the picture. He became a globe-trotter, a sort of soldier diplomat. His mission? To discuss plans for collective security with member nations of the North Atlantic Alliance. This was to be insurance against aggression by Soviet Russia. Bradley, finally, was known throughout the world as a great leader. The story of Omar Bradley would not be complete without mentioning the former Mary Elizabeth Quayle, who married Bradley a year after his graduation from West Point. She watched Bradley being sworn in as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff by Defense Secretary Johnson. With great pride, Mrs. Bradley told everyone that Omar Bradley was just the type of man he seemed to be. There was nothing hidden about General Bradley. As chairman of the Joint Chiefs, America's top soldier took his seat at the first meeting of the Defense Committee of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization held in Washington. NATO was designed to resist aggression. That was the keynote. By act of Congress and the deep respect and admiration of a fellow Missourian, Bradley was awarded a 5th star. Bradley became a frequent visitor at the White House. Early in 1951, at a Security Council meeting, he sat beside the man who, along with his father, symbolized his ideals in life. General Marshall, at this time, Secretary of Defense. They had a very close working relationship. Bradley was to pay almost 300 visits to the White House, many of them to brief the president on the progress of the war in Korea. Again, he visited war rooms, this time under the banner of the United Nations. As a global military strategist, Bradley believed that we should not press our military advantage too far in this one area of communist aggression. The fighting raged from June 1950 to July 1953. These were precarious times. At stake was America's global prestige, the true leader of the free world. This war by proxy, was a new type of Soviet aggression, where the Kremlin directed a conflict in the front yard of Korean homes. As in World War II, Bradley helped direct Allied forces close to the battle lines. And so it came to pass, from the year 1915, a West Point classmate of Bradley's, Ike by name, went places too, becoming President of the United States. He is playing host here to our top soldier of the nation and other members of the class of 15. Time, May 1953, shortly before Bradley's leaving active assignments. It seemed fitting at this time to name an American town after Bradley. To quote Bradley, "No boy ever came out of an Army camp with any more or any less moral fiber, and any more or any less courage than he had when he left his family fireside." Bradley, West Virginia, on U.S. Route 21 between Beckley and Mount Hope. He came a long way, this general from the humble roots of America, to enrich America's heritage of service to mankind and love of country. As a citizen soldier, General Bradley will always be ranked among the truly great men of history, and certainly one of America's greatest generals.